Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II.
And I'm Robyn Vincent. Today on the show, it's Election Day, and across Detroit, young people are asking hard questions about power, about progress, and about the issues that matter most to them.
Plus, why a Republican senator from Michigan's Upper Peninsula crossed party lines to fix the state roads with marijuana tax money.
Then in Midtown, a warm meal and an open door. Boss Blue sets a community dinner table where chefs volunteer and neighbors break bread.
From the ballot box to the dinner table, this is the Metro, where we stand for the messy, essential work of democracy.
And given that focus, today we begin at the ballot box. It's Election Day in America, and once again, the question is, what kind of country do we want to be? In state after state, new voting laws have made it harder to cast a ballot. Election workers face threats. Trust in the process is eroding. But there's also new energy and a strong current of change moving through the country. In New York City, Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic socialist, leads the mayor's race. Here in Michigan, Abdul El Sayed and Mallory McMorrow are pushing bold grassroots campaigns. From Minneapolis to Seattle, progressives like Omar Fetta and Katie Wilson are finding real traction. Their popularity says something. Voters want affordable housing, clean water, buses that run, health care that works, food that's fresh and cheap. And that demand, more than any single race, may be democracy's last line of defense. So today, as Americans vote, we turn to E.J. Dionne, a Washington Post columnist and Brookings scholar, to help us read this moment and what it tells us about the future of American democracy. E.J., welcome back.
Oh, it's great to be with you. I love WDET and Detroit, and you are the original home of one of my favorite journalists, Don Gagné. So I always love joining you and your show. Thank you.
We always love having you, EJ. So you've watched...
By the way, I have switched to the New York Times, just for the record. I'm now a contributing writer at the Times, but that's another story.
Oh, okay. Well, yes, maybe that's something we'll need to dig into a little bit more later on in the show. Thank you for the correction. You've watched decades of American elections. I'm wondering what feels different about this one, not just in tone, but in what's actually being tested.
Well, you're right that this whole moment feels different than anything I felt in politics, and I've been on this earth for a long time. The obvious thing is Trump and the various threats to democracy that he represents, whether it's prosecuting political enemies, as you said in your lead-up correctly, all kinds of potential interference with the electoral process designed to push elections his way, the Republicans' way. Uses of executive power that go way beyond the law, or at least what we thought was the law. And we could go on. The New York Times the other day had 12 measures of whether we were moving in an authoritarian direction, and on all 12, we were moving that way. So that's the kind of umbrella over this election. And there's real fear, as you suggested, that these elections look like they are going to come off without a hitch, although there's worry about whether the federal government will do anything to interfere, say in Virginia, where Democrats seem almost certain to win the governorship, and New Jersey, where the race is closer, but the Democrat is favored. But also what's going to happen in 2026. So those are all those things are going on here. In the meantime, normal politics is also going on. And what's really striking to me about all three of the sort of headline races, you were right to mention Minneapolis and Seattle and other races going on around the country. But in all three of these races, the issue of prices, which was one of the issues that helped Donald Trump win the last election, is now being used by the Democrats. The cost of living was central to Zohran Mamdani's rise in New York City, where he's very heavily favored to win today, and Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat in Virginia, and Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat in New Jersey, have all made prices and the administration's failure to act on them. Their prices are still going up, central to the campaign. And lastly, they take place at a time when the president's popularity is really dropping. A poll came out yesterday, I think, or the day before, showing him in the 30s. An approval rating, his approval ratings are very close to where they were after January 6th, which tells you something about the mood of the country.
So Democrats are taking a page from Trump's playbook that was quite successful and speaking to people from an economic standpoint, speaking to them about the pain that they're feeling financially. Also, when we talk about Trump, it reminds me of something that you once wrote, E.J. Dionne, and that is that cynicism is the enemy of citizenship. And it has me wondering, are we seeing that cynicism peak, or are voters beginning to push back against it? I mean, the positivity and inclusivity that's helped propel Zohran Mamdani suggests the latter.
You know, I am so glad you said that, and I'm glad you quoted something I still agree with. I very much think that one of the themes out there today is hope. And I think that, a lot of people have compared Zohran Mamdani to President Obama because his whole campaign has been rooted in a sense of agency on the part of the electorate. He has this. I've written that the best pundits about the New York City mayor's race were the students or teachers at his middle school who gave him the award one year for the best smile. And the smile matters not just because we like people who smile, not just because it's hard to say somebody's a dangerous radical when he is such a warm person, but the smile kind of embodies this campaign of hope we can grab control of our economic circumstances. And yesterday I interviewed Abigail Spanberger for something I'm hoping to write, who is the Democrat running for governor. She's a moderate Democrat, but she has sort of also used that theme of hope and a real sense of I see you when talking to voters, excluded voters. She talked about people in the poor rural parts of the state who have felt unseen. And I think that one other thing, if I may mention it, there was just an election in the Netherlands where the far-right party, the leading far-right party, took it on the chin. And the winner in that election ran a campaign that was compared to Obama's. Yes, we can do this. That version, I can't speak Dutch, but it was the Dutch version of yes, we can. And so I think there's a sense that you can't push back against the dangers we face only by saying we have a lot to fear, although we do have a lot to fear, but also by suggesting there is a way out of this. And I think Mamdani invoked that. I think Spanberger invoked that. To some degree, Mikey Sherrill invoked that in New Jersey.
So this is an appetite that people really have right now. It's an appetite of hope. It's an appetite for something positive. And it sounds like Trump, with all of his cynicism and some of the very dark ways that he tends to describe people and the state of the country, that Democrats are finally harnessing that and giving the exact opposite, and it's working as far as messaging.
Right. And I think there is something, probably after the election, we'll see the usual arguments among Democrats about move to the center, move left, be more populist, and all of that. But there's something that really unites the sort of center-left or center of the party and the left, and that is a shared sense that on almost every front, large majorities of the electorate think Trump has gone too far in a whole series of areas. So even people in the electorate who may have voted for him in 2024. Look at what he's doing on on immigration. Look at what he's doing with the troops in the streets. Look at what he's doing in his radical exercises of executive power. And they're saying that's not what we voted for. And, of course, his opposition didn't vote for that in the first place. And so I think what you're seeing come together in these campaigns, and obviously in some of these mayor's races, you're seeing more direct confrontations between, say, the center left and the left, Mamdani versus Cuomo in the two races you mentioned in Minneapolis and Seattle. So there are still those arguments going on. But where the choice involves Trump in those three headline races, the center and left are coming together and saying, whatever we disagree on, we think this is going too far. This is not the way to run the country. But they are also giving voters a sense that this is an opportunity to push back against that, and this is an opportunity to vote for something different.
So this could be a moment then where center Democrats and Democrats on the left actually build a bridge and come together and do something that they have long been criticized for, which is being too disparate.
Right. Well, I think my own view is that there is no successful coalition against the right that doesn't involve both the center and the left. Yeah. And the left, as Mamdani has shown in an extraordinary way, provides extraordinary energy and organization. I mean, one of my favorite numbers about the New York race is how many new voters got registered. By the time this election, by the time registration closed, 107,000 new voters had registered. This was way beyond anything that happened 4 years ago.
Over 100,000 voters?
New registrants in New York.
Wow.
And, I've seen all kinds of numbers, but there are at least 50,000 people who have mobilized behind his campaign. But middle-of-the-road voters of various kinds, and it's hard to define, you can be moderate in many different ways, but middle-of-the-road voters are essential to building a majority coalition. And that's, I think one of the interesting things Mamdani did, go back to how he began his campaign. He went into the Bronx and talked to voters who had either switched to Trump, and these were mostly Black, Latino, Asian voters, AAPI voters, and said either why didn't you vote or why did you vote for Trump? And one after another talked about the high cost of living. And he listened to the voters, and he rooted his campaign. All his core campaign promises are rooted around the cost of living. The cost of living is not just a left issue. It's also an issue that concerns all kinds of voters, particularly working class voters of every race and ethnicity. And he built a campaign around that. And I think there's something to be said for that. Again, this conversation I had with Spanberger were about conversations she had with voters in parts of the state who felt unseen. And so I think, again, I don't want to overread these elections. There's a great habit among political pundits to look at elections the year after these classic races in Jersey, New York, and Virginia, and sort of draw all kinds of conclusions that prove to be wrong. So I admit up front that there's always the danger of overreading that. But I really do think something important is happening out there that we shouldn't ignore.
EJ, Dionne, I think we need to also acknowledge some of the worries with voting rights itself. I mean, since 2020, dozens of states have passed laws tightening voting access, mail ballots, early voting, even who counts the votes. I'm wondering, what do you think the cumulative effect of all that is?
Well, I think what you're seeing, and as you know, this goes back to some of the stuff Stacey Abrams was working on down in Georgia, a number of years ago, where it's not like the old Jim Crow where you just barred a whole group of people from voting, black people from voting, with kind of phony literacy laws. Can you tell me how many jelly beans are in this jar kind of tests? What's happening is it's like shaving off 5 or 10% of the electorate, making it harder for people to vote, ending Sunday voting, which was particularly popular has been particularly popular among black voters who went to church and then went to vote. I've always liked that combination. The extreme case, don't give people water on the long lines, or voter IDs where in Texas passed a law where you could use your concealed carry permit, but a student at the state university couldn't use a government-issued student ID. Now, who is that designed to keep out of the electorate? And so all these laws are designed to make it harder for people to vote and are aimed at particular groups of voters. And that's a real problem. And that is not even dealing with the danger that Governor Pritzker talked about, which is, are these troops on the streets of some of our big cities like Chicago, in order to get us used to the idea of troops on the street? What will happen in 2026 when we have national elections? Will those troops be there? If somebody had said that 5 or 10 years ago, a lot of people would reasonably have said that sounds paranoid. Right. I think in this climate, it doesn't sound paranoid. It's something to worry about. And so I think we have to keep an eye both on the laws passed to sort of cut back on the electorate to make it harder to vote. After we actually opened up voting during the pandemic, we should have built on those pandemic reforms, which made it easier to vote. Instead, some states are pushing back, and Trump is trying to have some of those practices sort of instituted nationally. Fortunately, a court pushed back, throughout an executive order he issued on this recently threw that out. But we do have to worry about those things.
I mean, election workers and local clerks now need security protection. What does it say when public servants fear for their safety for doing this kind of work?
Well, my sister was the head of the Board of Elections. They call it Board of Canvassers, where she lives, for a number of years. She finally retired, not because of fear, but because she felt it was time for new blood in there. But I was, for the first time in my life, I thought my sister was doing this great civic thing in her town in Rhode Island. And the last couple of years, I started worrying about her. And Rhode Island is not a swing state. Fortunately, it hasn't for my sister. It didn't receive some of the same kind of threats. But yes, and a lot of election clerks, a lot of people who work elections have left that kind of work because of this pressure. This is a terrible thing. The working at the polls was a classic civic activity that people on both parties and no party used to engage in because they wanted their neighbors to be able to vote safely and conveniently. And to have people like that driven out of the political process is really it's deeply sad, and it's also somewhat scary.
Right. And when we take that together with other things that you've mentioned, for example, seeing the Trump administration send National Guard troops into cities without state approval, watchdogs inside Homeland Security shut down, civil service jobs turned political, and I'm even thinking about book bans and anti-protest laws that are spreading across states. I mean, when we think about all of these things together, is this the steady normalization of authoritarian power in American life?
Well, that's the danger. And I think that, unfortunately, my answer to your question is yes. I think that what we're looking at is, the book has been written in Hungary by Orban and in Turkey by Erdogan. Erdogan has gone a step farther and has jailed his main opponent in the next coming presidential election. But Orban has done it with subtlety, having media taken over by political allies. Sound familiar? Gerrymandering to guarantee his party more seats than the votes might allow him. Sound familiar? You do have this playbook that's been used by authoritarians, and it's not like a military coup. It's sort of, as it were, creeping authoritarianism, where step by step you have less capacity for the opposition to operate. And unfortunately, again, the New York Times is hardly a radical newspaper. And that editorial they ran, which I had nothing to do with, by the way, I'm praising the work of somebody else. That editorial ran about the 12 measures of are we moving toward a more authoritarian regime? And the answer is yes on all 12. That should bother a lot of people, not just lefties, not just Democrats, but all kinds of people, Republicans who believe in democracy just as much as those of us on the other side do. So, yes, we have a lot to worry about.
EJ, in countries where a democratically elected leader with strong authoritarian tendencies secures more than one term, including the examples you just mentioned, Orban in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey, Putin's extended rule, what then happens to the durability of democratic institutions? I mean, do checks and balances atrophy for good? It seems that they have in those countries, or can they rebound after the leaders exit?
Well, Putin runs essentially a dictatorship. What's really heartening in a way about both Hungary and Turkey is that the opposition is still alive. It's a kind of, I don't think it's a great term, but let's call it soft authoritarianism, where there is still an opposition. And Orban is very worried about the next election, that there is an opposition leader who came out of his own party and left, who seems to be gaining ground. In Turkey, Erdogan has gone a step farther, jailing his main opponent. So the threat to the opposition there is greater. So we do have still an awful lot of freedom of action. Thank God these elections are happening today, where the opposition has a real chance of winning, is probably, I would say, likely to win in all three. So we're not all the way down that road yet by any means, but we have to watch the warning signs. And again, that's why Barack Obama once said that people accused him of being a hope monger, and I always love that term, hope monger. But I think that one of the things authoritarians need is for people to give up and to say we can't change anything. We're going to go back to our private lives, live it as best we can, and let them run things. And we can't do that. And you need to have hope that there's another day down the road in order to stay engaged. And I don't think we should not give up on that hope.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Brookings scholar E.J. Dionne. It's Election Day in America, so we're talking about voting democracy and the stakes of this political moment. We'll be right back. Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. I've been speaking with Brookings scholar and New York Times columnist E.J. Dionne, and it is Election Day in America. So we're talking about voting, democracy, and the stakes of this political moment. Now, E.J., you've often called for a coalition of the decent. What does that look like in 2025, and who's still capable of leading it?
Well, I think you're seeing a coalition like that. For example, in Virginia, I went out on Sunday to a Spanberger rally, the Democrat running, and this crowd was it was in a suburban area where people told me that they have gotten involved in politics for the first time. Some of them are people who work for the government or government contractors who've been laid off in this period, the kinds of people who go to school board meetings, the kinds of people who worry about their kids' future. And a coalition of decent doesn't mean that we all agree on every issue, but a coalition of decent are people who believe that a democratic system is rooted in real argument among people about how to go forward, not pure anger, and certainly not threats against those who disagree with others. And I use that phrase. Decent is. I don't want to say that decent is sometimes a word that makes me uncomfortable because I don't want to accuse people in the country of being indecent. There are a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump, including, by the way, my hometown of Fall River, Massachusetts, which voted for a Republican for the first time in 100 years this year. Because it was a town that had been on its back economically for a long time, and there was a lot of anger out there. So there are plenty of Trump voters who I want to win over to a coalition of decent, because what they're angry about, they have a legitimate right to be angry about their economic circumstances. We can see it in industrial areas all over the country where people lost well-paying work and never recovered from that. But it does involve a certain basic respect for the rights of others, the rights of people not like you. And I think that's sort of part of the core of decency. And I think there is a decent majority, I think a potentially very big one in our country.
And this also kind of goes back to something you talk about, and this is how faith in any form still shapes civic duty and how it can in a time when so many people feel unmoored from institutions.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a big argument, as you know, and I'm sure you've talked about a lot within the religious world, just to take the example of Christians, about, what does the gospel tell us about how we should organize ourselves and deal with each other? What did Jesus preach? And for lots and lots of people in the country, what he preached about justice, what he preached about about the poor and our obligations to the least among us, is sort of at the heart of Christianity. And there's a form of Christian nationalism out there that seems to have forgotten that. So in our sort of efforts to change the country, I think part of that is a big argument to be had among people who, as Lincoln said, pray to the same God and read the same Bible and have come to rather different conclusions. And I think we have to fight for a world. I love Martin Luther King's. I quote all the time his talk about letting justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's in the scripture, and I think that's a faith worth fighting for.
E.J. Dionne, New York Times columnist, scholar, and longtime student of the American experiment. Thank you.
Bless you. Thank you so much.
As we've been discussing on this election day, democracy isn't a guarantee. It's a practice. The laws matter, the votes matter, but so does faith. Faith that the small act of showing up still counts for something. If you haven't yet, I hope you'll cast your vote and make your voice heard. I'm Robyn Vincent, and this is The Metro. We'll be right back.